just maybe to give you an idea, of the place where I work, so the European Commission. You all know the European Commission, but I work in DG Santé, so health and consumer, and food safety issues. Let's say to summarize, we are proposing, the EU legislation for food safety issues, for other things as well, but for food safety issues. And we are as well monitoring, the way the member states are implementing the legislation. And we do as well coordinating work, and you will see what we do in the field of food fraud. In my unit, we deal with all the IT systems. So when I talk about IT systems for food safety, one of the most well-known systems, this is the TRACES system, which is about imports out of the EU. So it's about certification concerning public health, animal welfare as well. And it's a very big system which is used, let's say, at customs, at borders with the customs unit. And then we have other big systems. I will come back during the presentation to this system in more details because they are linked with the food fraud issues. So before starting on food fraud, I wanted to highlight that there are no EU definition for food fraud. So we have used, with the member states, we have used with a common agreement the fact that to talk about food fraud, we need 4 criteria. So the first one is the violation of the EU food law. The second one is about, as you can see, the intentional factor, and this is the main difference between a fraudulent activity, food fraud, and irregularities, non-compliances. And this is the most difficult one to prove as well. And then you need to have, let's call it, an economic gain or an advantage from this fraudulent activity. And the fourth criteria, it's about the deception of customers. Here we are talking about customers and not consumers, because it could be a consumer, but many times, and we have seen that during the horse meat crisis, it's about business to business, so customers. I always insist on one point. Fraudsters, concerning food issues, they have no interest at all to create a public health issue. Because immediately, they will be seen, they will be in the newspapers, and then the business is stopped. So they have no interest to do that. It happens, but most of the time, it's by accident. And in some countries, even when you have a sanction concerning a public health issue, it will be much higher from the judicial proceedings than it is if it is only about economic issues. Just to give you an example, during the melamine crisis in China, for example, people were killed, for sanctioned to death penalty in China because, they killed some people, with the fraudulent activity on melamine on milk. So what are we doing on food fraud? The first one, this is the title of the presentation. We have created after the horse meat crisis, we have created what we call the EU Food Fraud Network. What does it mean? It's within each member state to have at least one contact point to deal with food fraud. In Scotland, this is FSS, which is the contact point with a special unit with Ian and Ron. And we have this in all countries. But as you will see later on, the services are not so specialized as they are here in Scotland. I would say that you are kind of leaders in Europe with the way you have developed your food crime unit here in Scotland, if you compare it to other countries. Then we do as well EU coordinated cases. What does it mean? You will have an example at the end, so I will keep this at the end. It's when you have an EU interest or something which is linked between the exchanges in the system, the European Commission, my unit, we propose to the member states to take the lead to coordinate the action, not from the judicial point of view, from the administrative point of view, to exchange information. Then we have done control plans within the EU. They were the first one after the horse meat, where we have done as well some tests in all Europe. We have followed with other kind of tests on honey, on fish, concerning substitution of species, and as well for honey, it was concerning essentially addition of sugar. Then we have organized training for the competent authorities, and not only the food inspectors, but we have tried to mix inspectors with investigators, police, customs officers, and as well, when we can, justice officers. And then we have a new framework of legislation which will be in place in 2019. And the main issues for this, there will be the creation of EU reference centers specialized for food authenticity. The Commission will have the possibility to nominate some centers. And here we will work with part of the European Commission institution, which is a joint research center, which is part of the Commission, who will lead from the research, the scientific point of view, this kind of call for tenders. This regulation gives us a broader scope. At the moment, to use the IT system, you will see it afterwards, it is limited to food, feed, and some other issues, but not too much. You can see here that we will extend the scope to fight against fraudulent activities for plants, for animal welfare, for animal health, and it will start, in 2019. You can see below the marketing standards. What does it mean? This is the quality legislation from what we call the Ministry of Agriculture. How a product should be done with. So it's a kind of cahier des charges. So this quality regulation is under DG Agri, and as well, it will be clearly covered by this new legislation. You have here an idea about the delay. What is very interesting is that in the system which is in place, you have a new procedure where the member states, they will be obliged to answer to a request from another member state. So it means that, for example, Scotland has a problem with a product coming from Germany. Let's take Germany as an example. They will make a request in the IT system, and there will be now a delay to answer the question from Scotland. So as you can see on the scheme. Now, for me, what is the core of the fight against food fraud? This is, and we have seen that after the horse meat crisis, this is to strengthen the collaboration between specialized services. So the food expert from one hand, the customs or police from the other end, and justice, the prosecutors. You can see on the scheme that at European level, we had what we call Eurojust for the coordination of justice. We had Europol for the coordination of police, but we were missing some specialized services with investigative powers to make the link with our food expert, and this in many, many countries. One of the outcomes of the horse meat crisis, you know it very well, this is the creation in the UK of the UK Food Crime Unit, and in Scotland. I don't know if it was a link as well, if it has been created recently as well, but I think this was the link as well with the horse meat crisis. Why do we need specialized services? There are really two different jobs. Food inspectors, generally, they do audits in the plants, but they do not have, this mindset of investigation. And to do that, to go to computers, to go for traceability, generally you need investigative powers that they do not have. So in other words, what do we expect at Commission level for these specialized services? So I'm very clear, we don't have that in all member states. To be honest with you, very few member states have all these powers. Jan maybe will tick the list as well from his own perspective. And I'm keen as well to receive your views, on what should be added to this, because it was an internal work that we have done with our team. What could be expected from the services? Of course, as you can see, capability in intelligence, in investigations, in prosecution. One key element, and you see that the services in Europe which are the most effective are the one with a specialized prosecutor for environment and safety issues. Why? Because when you are an investigator, when you bring a file to a prosecutor, he's like everybody. He will make priorities. If you are in a local area, and in this area, you have rape, crime, drugs, terrorism sometimes, food will be the last to come. And we see a very long delay between, let's say, the administrative part from the investigative power, from the inspectors or from specialized services, and the action from the justice. And it's not to blame the justice. And the second point, a prosecutor who is used to deal with food issues, he will be much more specialized to understand such a complicated issue. Because for all the people who are dealing with food issues, you know how complicated is the legislation and is the subject. Now, IT tools. As I mentioned, we have built in Europe different systems to exchange between member states. And this is one of the real added value of what we are doing at EU level. You have a very well-known network which is called RASF, Rapid Alert System for Feed and Food. This is when you have a public health risk. The main objective, and everybody is informed, one member state he can analyze the risk for health. He will put that into the system that the product can be recalled quickly in all member states. And this is a system which exists since 40 years. 39, 40 years, this is for the birthday next year. Then we have created, after the horse meat crisis, two other systems, one to exchange about non-compliances and one to exchange about suspicion of fraud. The difference, you remember the 4 criteria. You think that it is intentional and it is fraud. When it's not, it's an irregularity, a non-compliance, and it should go into the green part. These two systems are not compulsory. This is a big difference with the rapid alert system. You are not obliged to put something into this system. It's on a voluntary basis. But when you put it, the member state who receives the request is obliged to answer you. So this is a kind of guarantee, you know, that there will be a follow-up to something that you have seen in your own country. After the fipronil crisis, the eggs, I'm sure that you have heard about it as well, there were some gaps within these systems. So we had to clarify. And this is a scheme which will be developed for 2019 with a new legislation. You can see that all the systems will be put together to as well facilitate the analysis of the data which are into the systems. And this will be linked to traces as well, the import system. So you can see that for food fraud, it's very clear this was the same for fipronil. If you have a public health issue, you need to, first of all, think about public health, to put it in RASF, and to recall the product. And then you can continue to investigate. These are some examples of kind of cases that you would find in the different systems. So I will not insist. IRAF's public health, AAC, it's about non-compliances, food fraud, it's about intentional, deliberate violation of the law. You will see here the results of these systems. So I do not put a rapid alert system. This is a very specific system with everything. But here you will have the results concerning the AAC, AA, which means non-compliances. Here we are talking about non-compliances. You can see the big increase of exchange in the system between 2016 and 2017. So it means first that the member states are really starting to use the system. This system has been launched mid-2016, which as well explain, this big increase. These are the member states using the system. You can see that UK is quite a big user of the non-compliances system, so to use this system with 39 cases. And why Germany and Austria? Because they really see the advantage, and they exchange even in German between themselves when it's cases for Germany and Austria. So here, this is per kind of problems of non-compliances. So you can see that one of the first non-compliances that we see, it's about mislabeling. We have the second one, it's about replacement, dilution, addition, or removal in the product. The other one is about treatment. So you have 114 of unapproved treatment and process. And the last one, 54, it's about problem of documentation. These statistics, you cannot say that this is a kind of statistical view of what are the problems in the EU. Why? As I remind you, it's not compulsory to use the system. So it would be a very bad interpretation to see that you can rely on the distribution of this kind of non-compliances. Now let's talk about food fraud. You can see the system has started by the end of 2015. We already, after the first year, had a huge number of suspicion of fraud which were exchanged within the member states. And it's still increasing slowly in 2017 with more than almost 180 cases of suspicion. You have the same distribution per country. So you can see here, and this is very logic, you have mostly, the main countries in terms of population, so in terms of consumption as well, and processing plants and processing food, which are using the system. So mainly Germany, France, UK, Italy. These are the main ones. The distribution is almost the same. So mislabeling first, adulteration comes second. The third one, you can see it's documentation. Here we are talking about falsification of documentation. So we have a lot in the system. And then the last one, it's about unapproved treatment. So for example, illegal use of antibiotics, illegal use of pesticides, such as this kind of case. Another interesting element, this is the rate of answer by member states. In blue, you have the number of requests that a member state has received. In orange, the number of requests to which they have answered. So maybe it's easier like that. You have the percentage of answer per country. Just to give you an idea. So I will go on. And this is how it looks like. So here you see really the way the system is presented, how they can exchange. So you can see there is a description of the product, description of the non-compliance, or here, we are in the non-compliance system here, AA, not food fraud. Huh? But for food fraud, it's exactly the same kind of presentation. And then I promise you to give you an example of what we do in terms of coordination. So what does it mean? Generally, we have one country highlighting a problem, and then you remind that they can choose 1, 2, 3, 4 countries, but the other ones, they don't see it. But you can have already some cases which are very similar in the system. And the one initiating the request, he will not see that other countries, they got the same problem. So you need somebody to have a look. And of course, that the member states must be confident that they will not disseminate this information. So what we do, we ask the country initiating the case, look, we have other similar cases. Would you like to share your information with the other ones? Or would you like that the European Commission takes the lead from the administrative point of view, not for the investigation? This is really the role of the member states, to coordinate the case. And then to make schemes, like you would see in normal police investigations. So this case came from Belgium. They raised this problem, of beeswax adulterated with paraffin and stearine. It was last year, so I would say summer last year. And what is exactly the problem? Well, beeswax, it's normally a natural product. But first of all, we have no clear definition into the EU law. Even in DG Agri, as I explained, DG Agriculture, they have marketing standards for many things, but they don't have beeswax. And in the food legislation, we have only a legislation concerning additives for beeswax. And we have another legislation which is about animal byproducts to be used either for candles, for example, for beeswax, or as well to be recycled for the bees, to help the bees to build their hives. You have just to keep in mind that a bee, they will need 8 kilos of honey to make 1 kilo of beeswax. So if you help them with the hives, you save a lot of money and they will produce more honey. So that's logical. So they want to help their bees to build the hives. So what happened? At the border, the Belgium, they made some analysis. And you can see here the level of contamination for paraffin in one batch was 52%. 52%. So this paraffin, you don't know if it is food grade. And this is exactly the same for stearine. We have no clue if it is food grade or not. And you can see we have made the calculation about the economic gain for the operators if they would have sold pure beeswax, sorry. So it can reach, more than dozens of thousands of euros. And now, what are the potential effects of stearic and palmitic acids on bee health? As you can see here, these photos, they came from the French. So what we have done, we have alerted, first of all, the member states, the network. We have as well alerted the beekeepers. This is the first thing we do when we have this kind of wide problem into the EU. To remind them their responsibility when they buy things, they have to take care. It's part of their responsibility. And then we have asked for more data. Why? Because as you can see here, you have one hive where it was clearly stearic acid, and the other one at the back, which is a normal one. So you can see the difference. One was completely destroyed. You have other pictures here giving you some elements. And we have now some studies from Belgium, it's from the Netherlands, showing some real effects on bee health. So it was reported, by, it's you? No. Really? You will mention it afterwards. And so now we are, in a way, we want to consult EFSA, the Food Safety Authority, to get a risk assessment concerning bee health, but as well public health. Because as you can see, more and more often, you find in the honey pot, you find the wax. And they even advise you that you can eat it for your health. So if you are not sure about the origin of the wax, it could be a real problem for health as well. So we need a risk assessment on this. And we have very few data at the moment concerning what you can find in a honey pot. This is just to show that we have analytical methods, which is not always the case. But here we have analytical methods which are not recognized as official at the moment, but it works very well if we listen to our labs. So you see here the connection with the scientific worlds of research laboratories. We always do that. It reminds you, the 4 criteria at the beginning. So for each case, we see, can we really call it food fraud? So I remind you, we need a violation of the EU food law. Here, the first violation that you would see is not EU food law. It's about trade law, between 2 partners that they need to be fair and blah, blah, blah. So, but this is not the EU law, so it's not really food fraud. But the other criteria concerning animal byproducts, so normally it's a category 3, so it means it cannot be sold later on, for human consumption, for example. And then for category 2, if it is category 2, so very bad quality, it needs to go to candles, not for bees. So containing paraffin and stearine, it should go to candles, not for beekeeping. Then you have what you have seen, the calculation of the economic gain and the analysis of the deception of customers, which has been analyzed and that I have mentioned before. You have here an idea of the timeline. This is always a problem when you deal with food fraud. You need to be very precise. And generally, you lack data. You need to collect the data. And this is very difficult for, let's say, the citizens, and as well for the media, to understand why sometimes it takes so long. But I can tell you, we are working like hell on this case, but as you see, it takes time. You will see that part of it here, it's really raising awareness with the stakeholders. We take a special attention to go to stakeholders committees, specialized one on bees. We went to conferences on bees to really explain them that they have to be careful to what they buy. So here you can see what could be the next steps. This is generally the way we present it to let our partners know what we are doing. So here in this case, it's to send it to EFSA, so the Food Safety Authority in Parma for the risk assessment. But we are awaiting still for data. Advice to stakeholder, I mentioned it. And now we are considering to organize, like you have seen for honey or for the fish substitution of species, we are considering maybe to have a coordinated control plan at EU level to see what is the situation on the market. And then, now we are pushing internally to have a legal definition concerning beeswax, and as well, maybe concerning as well the analytical methods, to be clear on the analytical method. You will find on the presentation the different links. We have plenty of stories like that, unfortunately. Just to give you an idea, each year we are dealing with almost 20 EU coordinated cases. They are not so big as this one, but we have some other ones which are much more worrying than this one. And Ian and Ron, they know perfectly well the collaboration that we have with Europol concerning certain cases which are very important. I'm always frightening people just after lunch. So just to remind you that our food has never been safer as well. And so we have to keep that in mind when we are communicating concerning food fraud. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. That was fascinating. I mean, we've certainly been doing a lot of work together, and it's quite nice to hear that Scotland is leading the way in some respects in relation to food crime. And I know that we have invested significant amounts in our food crime and incidents unit. We've got 15 minutes for questions and answers. We've got quite a few coming in, so I'll pick one from the screen here and move to the audience. But with the recent high-profile incidents in the UK and EU and the trend increasing, as you mentioned, do you think that that's an indication of reducing food safety, or the industry regulators are simply getting better at detecting and reporting the problem?
So I definitively think that there is a change of mindset within the competent authorities to look for food fraud. It's clear. So we will detect more and more. Now the scale of the fraud will be very different depending, on the topic. If it is linked with public health issues, as well, it will depend as well of the extent of the market, of course. Now, as I said at the beginning, there is no interest for the fraudsters to impact food safety. So there will be accidents because, you have seen in many cases like that, the processes to make the product are not good. So, of course, at any stage, you increase the risk of having a food safety problem. But they will never do it on purpose. Because here, we will jump into another category, which would be food defense, which is about more terrorism, And so this we have seen it, but in very, very small case at the moment.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's one of these things that the evidence will emerge and allow us, hopefully soon, to start measuring the effectiveness of other member states in terms of their own food crime investigation, intelligence sharing capacity. I'll move to the audience. Are there any questions for Eric from the audience? Bill?
Yeah, hi, Bill Adamson, Food Standards Scotland. You mentioned earlier in your presentation that one of the difficulties for you is, of course, being able to prove that there's some intent, which then would change something into the category of being considered to be food fraud in terms of your criterion. And I noticed that you also mentioned that for the most part you would consider misleading labelling to not necessarily fall there, but I presume if you were happy that misleading labelling was intentional and was providing economic gain and was deceiving the public, then that would indeed trigger it to be considered to be food fraud.
So your question is, if the labeling issue, is important in the fraudulent activities that we have highlighted.
That you would be confident that the misleading labelling wasn't just because of carelessness, but there was intention behind it, and
Yes.
that there was some economic gain associated with that misleading labelling,
Yes.
and that the public were being
Yes.
deceived. You would accept that as being food fraud.
You are touching here the analytical part, in the member states. So when I look, because we look every case in the system, when I look some cases in the non-compliances, so it means that for concerning mislabeling, which has been put into the system in non-compliances, personally, some of them, I would have put them, into the food fraud side. Let's be clear. It's a question of smell. All the ones which are in the food fraud, I can tell you, it's clearly fraudulent activity. Then you have to demonstrate it, when you are in the field, or you decide. You have two solutions here. You take the easy way, which is you put an administrative fine or sanction, or if it is very important, you can start judicial proceedings. In Belgium at the moment, there is a big crisis. I want to mention it because it was very similar to the Two Sisters story. Very similar. But I would say maybe not so damaging like the Two Sisters one. But the results in Belgium, it's about mislabeling of frozen product. They were changing the labeling. And here, it's damaging completely the image of the control bodies. And it is a pity because I can tell you by experience that these Belgian bodies, they have certainly one of the best agencies in Europe. They have created it after the dioxin crisis. It's a very good one. And now they are in huge difficulty because they have not acted timely to stop, this problem. First of all, to detect it, and then to stop it. And it's a pure problem, mostly a pure problem of labeling.
That's helpful. I mean, building on Bill's question, I mean, there's a question in here that I know that Ron and I have had a number of discussions around in terms of the terminology, and you opened your presentation by saying there is no explicit EU definition, but offered what that may include, if indeed there ever is one. But in terms of food fraud and food crime being definitions that are used frequently, do you believe that they are different? And should there now actually be a clearer, well-defined terminology around all this?
Yeah. First of all, it's a very good question. So, food fraud, as such, there are words. Codex is working on that. So it means that now there are discussions to provide an official definition, international definition on food fraud. We have to separate this idea of food fraud and judicial sanctions. This is the role of the member states or third countries to define the sanctions. Just take an example. I always take this one. It's easy for me, but I can take other ones. False certification. It's not a problem of food fraud. It's not a problem of food fraud. But you will have false certificates. As you have seen, we have many concerning food. We have around 60 per year at the moment. And this is the general legislation of the country will deal for judicial sanction. You will not choose a legislation on food. You will choose a legislation of falsification of official documents. I don't know the denomination in Scotland, and I don't care. They will have another one, in Italy, but they will have, for this falsification of official documents, it would be the same for passports or whatever, they would have specific judicial sanctions. So the definition as such, what is important is that your sanction in your country are covering almost all the field that you can find, concerning fraudulent activity on food. The definition is really, for me, food fraud, it's to know what we are talking about to make sure that we can exchange, data into the system.
So can we expect an agreed definition anytime soon?
In Codex, I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And industry is contributing in Codex. So it means it will be an agreed definition.
That's helpful. Ryan?
Yeah, Eric Atrine here from Food Standards Scotland. Has the Commission done any work with countries who've got poor response rate versus the requests? So for instance, Spain and I think it was Greece had quite a poor response rate to the number of requests to understand why they're not responding?
Alors, for me, this is a difficult answer.
There's nothing like being put in the spot, Eric, is
Yes,
there?
yes. No, because of course I'm not happy. I will be very clear. I'm not happy to see that some member states, it takes them longer or they have a rate of answer which is lower than the other one. Then it's sometimes about the organization. In Spain, as you know, it's you have the organization of the autonomías. They are quite independent, so it's not easy for the central level to really demand the answer. For me, what is the most important is that the answer is really an answer. So it means that depending on the question you receive and the facts which have been analyzed by the other country, you take that seriously in your investigations to give an answer and to provide as well a follow-up with sanctions which are quite obvious in some cases. So this is, I agree with you, it's not perfect, but this is a very new system. It will improve as well with the new official control regulation, as I have shown. They will have some delays to answer. But for me, the most important, this is the content.
Okay, thank you. We've got a few more questions on the board here. Eric, is there any relationship that you've been able to identify between the use of the AAC system within any EU country and its level of, its competitive level in food production or trading?
So you mean if they, depending on the country, if they use it more or not, depending on the level?
Yeah.
You have seen for food fraud, it's really balanced, I would say, due to the extent of the market. You have seen that Germany is a big player, France is a big player, Italy is a big player, Spain as well, UK as well. The other one a little bit less, but this is normal. So for me, the balance is good. For AAC, it's not a good example, as I explained, because you have two countries who have understood perfectly well the interest of the tool, and they are exchanging a lot, which is good. Maybe we will have much more from the other countries in the next years.
Okay. A question in the audience, and we'll take this one here and one over there.
Ian Anderson, Scottish Association of Meat Wholesalers. Has the EU missed an opportunity by not extending the official control regulations to cover fish, when substitution in the fish sector is known to be a large problem? And what is the difference between official control regulations and an EU coordinated control plan?
Okay, so first of all, the substitution of fish, of species, it's a mix between, let's say, the fishery regulation and the labeling regulation. But we have everything we need for that. We have everything. And when we have done the EU coordinated control plan, it was really easy to say compliant or not compliant. Later on, it's more difficult to say if it was intentional or not. Because in some cases of non-compliance, sometimes they have labeled a fish which was which was less expensive than the one which was in the product. And so here, there's no economic gain here. So no apparent interest to do it. Now concerning the EU coordinated control plans. So EU coordinated control plans, they are part of the official control the regulation now is setting the scene. But we can already do it with the old legislation. So it will not change many things with the new regulation. We can already do it. It's just a question of resources. And I can tell you by experience, in all member states, control bodies, they are lacking resources. It's very clear. It's very clear.
Okay, thank you, Eric. We'll take one more question from the audience, and we'll make a point of answering the questions that are going through the app separately.
Hi, Alan Rowe from the Rowett Institute. I think you may be able to answer the second question from the board at the same time as mine. I'm interested to know whether, through the trends analysis that you're seeing with the cases coming to you, where there's any evidence of where in the supply chain most fraud or crime is starting to happen.
Right. Alors, this point, sometimes it's very easy. You have one product, it has been produced, in one place, and the origin is known, and you find it easily. Where it is more difficult, it's when you have false certificates. Because here you start from scratch. Sometimes all the names are fake. All the names. When you ask the country of origin, could you investigate there? So you have to start, as always says here, you have to start to analyze where it comes from with the transport. Because transport company, they are paid by somebody. And then if you look who has paid this company, and then you start with difficulties, because generally the company who pays the transport, they are in Cyprus, they are linked to Solomon Islands, or whatever. You see what I mean? But you can really start with this. And if you ask the transport company where they have loaded the product and unloaded the product, generally the most interesting is where they have loaded the product. Normally this is in their business description. So this is the way where you can find, and it's sometimes difficult, the supply, of this product. Now saying that you have more problem in one country than in another, I would be very cautious. I would be very cautious.
Okay. Thank you, Eric, for a very interesting session, as ever. I've heard you present on this a number of times now, and the one thing's for certain around this, and certainly working with my team and working with Crime Stoppers as well, is that this isn't going away. If anything, we're seeing more and more intelligence coming through, and it's going to be interesting, the challenges that Brexit will pose in terms of ongoing dialogue, whatever that looks like and however that will be negotiated out. I'm certain that there will still be a need to communicate. We're going to have a round of applause for Eric Marin, please. Thank you.